Hello and welcome back. My name is Tristan Weiss and I'm with the Miami Valley Veterans Museum, and we're doing Valley Veterans this morning, and I'm back with Staff Sergeant Michael DeHart. Mick, thanks for coming back. So we left off talking about the firefight in the bomb crater. We were at the point where you were just getting ready to start kind of your egress and get back to safety.
Okay, well, we, a couple of the fellows picked up our medic who had died, and a couple of them picked up the wounded point man and headed towards the edge of the tree line. We discovered that we weren't that far from the edge of the tree line, and they burst out into the open. I was last to leave, following them out. When we got outside the tree line,
Mick, let me slow you down for a second. Let's walk this back just a little bit. I don't want anyone to miss part of this story and this action. So you're in the bomb crater. You now have an M60.
Well, I had expended all my ammo.
Okay.
And I had to go back to my M16.
All right.
And
as you're providing, you want your platoon to move out of the bomb crater.
Right.
What happened to get that platoon to move?
Basically, we just said exit stage right, and so they started me. By this time, the enemy had cooled their heels, and they were trying to get out of there too, because they knew what was coming. And so we're exiting, and I was just doing firing cover, make sure nobody wanted to get in the last.
And where were you at when you were firing cover? And was anyone else with you?
No, the platoon had already moved, towards the edge of the tree line, and then I followed them out. We came out into a big open area, and we moved about 200 yards away from that group of trees, if you will, and we're out in the open, and we're going to set up and be picked up by helicopters at that point in time.
So as you exited the bomb crater, and the platoon's moving out, they're basically on their way, and then you're trailing behind?
Yes.
What's happening at this point?
Well, once we got out of the tree line, there wasn't any firing, okay? I would occasionally just shoot small bursts just to make sure nobody wanted to start it up again.
What about before that, while you were actually climbing over that hump out of the bomb crater? What was going on?
Get out of Dodge as quickly as possible.
Was the enemy still firing?
No, it had pretty much backed off, or we wouldn't have tried to move because we would have been too exposed. I mean, once we got up on top of that mound of dirt, that was, like standing in the wide open.
All right.
And so we got out, moved away a couple hundred yards. I was talking to, all of a sudden, two of the jets came on station, and I was talking to them, and they actually wanted us to move farther away because they were going to drop a 500-pounder in there, and they were going to use napalm. And we were just out of gas that day. We were too tired because it's getting on towards dusk, and we didn't want to hang around till dark. So we told him, come on, Of course, you're talking to those guys in those jets, they talk like they're back home in their easy chair, Well, y'all just sit back and watch. We'll take care of it from here. And so we stood there and watched as the jet came, the first jet came in and came down low. And all of a sudden, this big thing came out of his belly, and he took off, and all of a sudden there was a huge explosion. And I mean, a big explosion. And then just shortly after that, here come the second jet. He came in real low. I was afraid he was going to hit the trees. And all of a sudden, a canister came out of his belly of napalm. And I had never seen napalm up close like that. And when it exploded, I thought it was going to go right up the fantail of that jet. And when it exploded into flames, the thing about napalm, not only does it burn, but initially it removes all the oxygen in an area. Because even where we were, we could feel the heat and feel the absence of good air, if you will. And so when they took off, then our choppers came in and picked us up and took us back to the LZ. And
So what was it like getting on the choppers? You've got napalm burning in the background. You just had jets fly through. You've got these choppers in. What was going through your mind at this point, Mick?
I'm still in good shape. Okay? Mentally, if you will. Okay? But we get back to the LZ, and when we land, the guys from the mortar platoon are rushing to greet us. I mean, they're taking our packs, they're taking our weapons, they're just unloading us, if you will. They're giving us, water, orange juice, milk, anything we wanted. They were just really taking care of us.
All right. So we're going to talk about that, Mick, but I really want to take you back. Helicopters. You called in your ride out, and you get back. These helicopters are landing. What's going on as these helicopters are landing? Can you paint the picture for me?
Well, what other than the guys coming to help? I'm still in good shape, but my the platoon sergeant of the mortar platoon, who had been kind of my mentor, Sergeant Booth, grabbed me and took me into his little hooch, if you will. He had kind of a...
Well, I'm not talking about after you got back to the landing zone.
Yeah.
I mean, you've left the bomb crater. You've come out of the tree line. You've seen all of this take place where you just were. These helicopters come in. What's happening when these helicopters come in? You just standing in an empty field waiting on helicopters, or what's going on?
Well, by that time we knew we were relatively safe, all things considered, because the enemy was trying to get away from those jet airplanes. Okay, not all of them got out of that tree line, and so we got in what you call LZ formation. We broke down into groups, 4 and 5 to a group, and the choppers came in. I was last on the choppers, and took a few pot shots into the trees to let them know I was.
Is that what they were, pot shots, or were you actually seeing enemies still
You
kind
could
of
see, not many, but you could see the enemy getting away from that tree line, because they knew those jets were coming. You could see them running, and
So
I was the last to wave goodbye, so.
So you made sure all your troops were
In
taken
choppers,
care of.
yes. Yeah.
So were you even in the chopper before it took off, or?
Well, let's say I was on the skid. I look back on it now. You're not supposed to ride on the skids of a helicopter, and I won't get on a 6-foot stepladder now. But I think of the times I rode on the skid, hanging onto the helicopter.
All right. So you were basically on the side of a helicopter as it was taking off,
Right.
climbing in. enemy wasn't still trying to aggress, take any lucky shots?
If they were, I didn't, I didn't feel them. I just felt having the luxury of firing a few shots without somebody firing back. So
Guess it makes that ammo belt a little lighter.
yeah, it was.
All right. So, thankfully, you're out of that. You get back to. Did you go back to or Ike?
Mm-hmm.
All right. And that's when you were greeted by the mortar platoon. All right. Let's talk about that.
Well, like I said, Sergeant Booth came and got me and took me away from the group, okay? So we went over into his area, okay? He had like a tent set up there, just for him. And he and I got down inside of it, and he reached down under the something and came out with a bottle of whiskey and poured me a couple fingers. But just prior to him doing that, as soon as I got into his tent, was when the full impact of what had just happened hit me.
And what was that impact, Mick?
And I had a meltdown. In other words, and I'm not one to explain the psychology of anything, but when I was out there, I was busy, doing what I hopefully was supposed to do. And when I got inside his tent, and I'm sure lots of different vocations have felt this, everywhere from police officers to athletes, that rush, that adrenaline rush, maybe, whatever. Anyhow, I broke down, and I made fun of it over the years, I think, to deal with it, because I really broke down. I just started screaming and bawling. Excuse me. And just like in the movies, okay? Sergeant Booth reached across and he slapped me so hard I thought my head was going to be in the next county, And that's when he brought the bottle out and poured me a couple fingers.
So that action that day, you had one man killed, one man wounded at the very start. Any other casualties that day?
There were some, minor wounds. I talked to the guys since then at reunions, and it'd be interesting just to be able to see a slow-mo of what happened, the rounds coming this way and our rounds going that way, as far as, and we'd probably be amazed, at the hundreds and hundreds of bullets, if you will, going back and forth, and we felt not fortunate, but we were, okay, because we were outnumbered, okay. They just didn't have a chance to prepare properly, and we were able to make them keep their heads down.
In no small part due to you. I understand you received some recognition for this?
I received a Silver Star for that day. And also Jesus Santiago Durand, the other M60 machine gunner, received the Distinguished Service Cross for that day, for his valor.
The one that was to your right while you were to the left and putting down some suppressive fire?
And then,
And that's when the platoon started to egress and evacuate, right?
yeah, shortly thereafter, because I think we, caused enough of a deterrent that they gave it up. Sergeant Washington was also received a Silver Star for that day. And those, and as I understand it, we'll get into that later on. Duran, his award was later upgraded. Mine was later upgraded.
Yep. And we'll definitely get into that.
Yeah.
Mick, I know this wasn't the only real firefight you were in. You were one also in May. And this one actually occurred at the landing zone Ike, is that correct?
Well, I was involved in 2 ground attacks, and the one you're talking about was the first one. What we call a ground attack is when the enemy circles your LZ. And if you want to just picture it as a fort, a big fort surrounded by barbed wire instead of posts. And the enemy, the NBA, were very resourceful, extremely good soldiers. They just had the misfortune that when they came south to fight, they had to stay until it was over. So some of them had probably been down there 3 to 4 years by the time I got there, and probably stayed in 3, 4 more years. But anyhow, they would circle your LZ and attack sometime during the night, generally 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. They would have some of their individuals would strip down to like a loincloth, if you will, and grease their bodies up with heavy grease of some kind. And they would have a satchel, cloth satchel with explosives in it. And they would, at dark, somewhere time around 9 o'clock, they would start crawling from where they were hitting in the tree line. And they would take the next 5 to 6 hours to crawl 50 yards. Okay. Well, why all the grease? Well, when they would get to that barbed wire, and some of it was what they called concertina wire, which has like little razors on it. They would crawl under that wire. And by being so greased up, that wire would just kind of slide over their bodies, okay? And they would take that long to cover that short of a distance, because they might move their left arm just a little bit, and they might stay in that position for the next 10 minutes. Then they move their right arm. You get the drift, little by little, okay? And then about 3 o'clock in the morning, they're hoping G.I. Joe is sound asleep on guard duty, and their goal is to get inside your perimeter and run around with these charges and throw them into bunkers. And in general, create chaos within your circle. Well, so instead of firing out at the enemy, you start firing across your circle, then you can see what happens, And but on that night, and I'll sing this individual's praises forever. I had a young man, Glenn Goss, who just really thrived on pulling guard duty. And he had a starlight scope, which was similar to infrared, except starlight scope used existing light. And it was a rather big, awkward thing. You could mount it on an M16, but it was not a good sniper scope, because it was yay long, yay big around. But you could see at night. And he loved that scope, and he'd sit there and he'd look around. And he spotted movement and called Sergeant Booth. Sergeant Booth came over. looked. Sergeant Booth opened up on them and spotted them, and so they knew they had been compromised, and they made their rush. And we fought probably for the next hour, 2 hours. And next morning we had 90 dead in VA outside the wire.
All right. So let's move on to the next one. Excuse me. That one happened in May or June?
May 14th.
So let's talk about the one that happened in June. Oh, wait. That one in May, you also received an award for, correct?
Yes.
And what was that?
I received another Silver Star.
So you're on your way to 2 Silver Stars now in your short time there. So in June 20th, 1969, also at LZ Ike again, what happened this time?
It was another ground attack at night. And here again, they tried to come through my company's side. And but a few of them got into the LZ on the other side and were creating some problems. I immediately left where, I would camp out for the night, grabbed my M16, went to check the perimeter. Okay, my first stop, I went to the, we had a .50 caliber set up at that time. And we had 2 fellas on it, 2 good-sized fellas, Rogers and Jennings, and Rogers Freeman and Jim Jennings, 2 good-sized boys. And I went over to check on them first, and they had that .50 caliber set up, and then they had a tarpaulin, over top of it, okay, to kind of hide it. And when I went under that tarpaulin and I saw Freeman, and I said, "How's it going?" He said, "Good." I was kind of leaning back against what I thought was a wall, and I said, "Where's Jennings?" And he said, "You're sitting on him." So he had been hit in the first wave of the attack. So I left them, and I was running to the other bunkers, to check on the guys. And as I was running, there was an explosion, and it threw me up against the side of a bunker. And I just left my feet, hit that bunker, and went to the ground, and basically said, "Wow, what was that?" Because at that point in time, I didn't feel any pain. So I got up and ran on to the bunker. And then when I got in the bunker, I thought I had a cramp in my leg. So I put it up against the wall, and you know how you push on your foot to relieve the cramp. I didn't know I had been hit. And then I thought, I got wet somehow, and I reached around, I grabbed my back, and it came around, and I was bleeding in the back. And so later on that morning, I was medevaced out. I had been part of an explosion and had shrapnel in my knee and shrapnel in my back. The explosion that got me had landed on the bunker of our medic, Joe Goetzer, and killed him. And I was back the next morning with Sergeant Booth and the battalion commander who had received a wound to his jaw.
And you received a Purple Heart for this action?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So far, 2 Silver Stars, a Bronze Star, and a Purple Heart. All right. Well, Mick, appreciate your time again today. So much to say about your story. It is a fantastic story. And thank you for tuning in to the Valley Veterans by the Miami Valley Veterans Museum.